Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. You know how much we love diving into some pretty complex topics here,
Yeah.
but today's deep dive is going to start with something that almost sounds too simple.
Yeah.
What if the sun got just a little bit hotter? Like
Hmm.
just 1 degree Celsius hotter. Now, I know you, our listeners, love to really get into the weeds with this stuff.
Hmm.
And you know that even a tiny change in a huge system like our sun
Right.
could have ripple effects that we might not even think about at first.
Absolutely.
So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a deep dive into all the potential consequences of a 1 degree Celsius increase in the sun's surface temperature.
Should be fascinating.
So for this one, I've been combing through some pretty interesting scientific papers
Okay.
and some reports on potential solutions and adaptations.
Awesome.
And of course, I've got you here to help us break it all down.
Happy to help.
So our mission for this deep dive, if you choose to accept it, is to understand not only the direct effects of this subtle solar shift, but also how it could impact life here on Earth, and more importantly, what we can do to prepare.
Love it. Let's jump in.
Okay, let's start with, well, the sun.
All right.
It's a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's kind of important for life on Earth as we know it.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
So we all know the sun is hot,
Yeah.
really hot.
Understatement of the year.
Right. But the sources I was looking at really drove home just how unbelievably massive and powerful it actually is.
It's mind-boggling, really, when you start to dig into the numbers.
Like, its surface temperature is already about 5,778 Kelvin,
Yeah.
which translates to over 5,500 degrees Celsius.
It's hard to even fathom that kind of heat, honestly.
Yeah, so we're talking about an object that's already unbelievably hot,
Yeah.
and then we're going to add another degree on top of that.
Right. So 1 degree might not sound like much in our everyday experience. You know, we barely even notice a 1 degree change in room temperature. But when you're dealing with an object as massive and energetic as the sun, things work a little differently.
So this is where this physics concept called the Stefan Boltzmann law comes into play.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
It basically says that the total energy radiated by an object
Okay.
is proportional to the fourth power of its absolute temperature.
Right. Which basically means that even a small increase in temperature can lead to a much bigger increase in energy output.
So it's not a linear relationship.
No, not at all. It's exponential, so it really ramps up quickly.
So if the sun's surface temperature goes from 5,778 Kelvin to 5,779 Kelvin,
Okay.
that seemingly tiny 1 degree increase actually results in about a 0.07% increase in the sun's total energy output.
Yeah. And I know 0.07% still might not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about the sheer scale of the sun's energy production, that tiny fraction represents a huge amount of extra energy being blasted out into space.
And a lot of that energy, of course, ends up heading towards Earth.
Inevitably. I mean, we're right in the sun's neighborhood, so yeah, we definitely feel the effects of that extra energy.
So how would that actually affect us down here on Earth? Well, the sources suggest that this extra solar energy could cause Earth's average global temperature to increase
Okay.
by about 0.1 to 0.2 degrees Celsius. Again, these numbers might seem pretty small.
Right, like almost negligible, especially compared to the sun's massive temperature.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. These seemingly tiny temperature increases can actually accelerate a whole bunch of climate change effects that we're already seeing.
So it's not just about things getting a tiny bit warmer.
No, not at all. It's about how this extra heat can act as a catalyst, kind of tipping the scales even further in a direction we don't want to go.
The sources highlighted a few key areas where we could see some pretty dramatic changes.
Okay.
First off, the polar ice caps.
Right. They're already melting at an alarming rate. And this extra heat would only make things worse.
Yeah. And then there are those extreme weather events that seem to be happening more and more often these days.
Nice, absolutely. Heat waves, droughts, floods, you name it. Those are all likely to become more frequent and intense with even a small global temperature increase.
And then there's the impact on ecosystems and agriculture.
Right. Which is huge because it directly affects our ability to produce food and maintain a stable environment.
So basically, even a small temperature increase from the sun could have some pretty massive consequences here on Earth.
It's a bit sobering, really, when you think about how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the temperature increase itself, right?
Yeah.
The sources also talk about something called space weather.
Oh, yeah, right. Space weather. That's another thing we need to be mindful of.
So apparently, a more energetic sun would also mean more intense solar flares
Okay.
and coronal mass ejections.
Right, which are basically these massive bursts of energy and charged particles that the sun sometimes throws our way.
And these coronal mass ejections, they could actually disrupt satellites and communication systems.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If a really powerful one hits Earth, it could cause all sorts of problems with our technology. Imagine widespread power outages, GPS disruptions, even problems with satellites that control things like air traffic control.
Wow. So it's not just about the climate. A hotter sun could mess with our technology too.
It's all connected, and as we become more reliant on technology, these kinds of disruptions could have really far-reaching consequences.
Okay. So we've talked about some of the potential problems, but what about solutions?
Yeah, let's get into that.
Thankfully, the sources I was looking at also offered some pretty solid ideas on how we can prepare for a slightly warmer, more volatile sun.
That's the good news, right? We're not just sitting ducks. We can take steps to adapt and mitigate the risks.
Absolutely. So the first area that a lot of these sources focused on was strengthening climate resilience.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
Well, it's about making our infrastructure more robust.
Right? Making sure our roads and bridges and buildings can withstand higher temperatures.
Yeah. It's also about green urban planning.
Hmm.
So planting more trees in cities to create shade, using reflective materials on buildings to reduce heat absorption, and designing cool roofs that radiate heat back into the atmosphere.
Those are all smart, practical solutions that can make a real difference.
And then there's the crucial issue of water management.
Oh, yeah, that's going to be huge as some parts of the world become hotter and drier.
Right. So things like improving water storage, reducing water waste in agriculture and households,
Okay.
and of course, protecting our existing freshwater sources.
It's about being proactive, managing this precious resource wisely.
Now, another key area that the sources emphasized was boosting agriculture and food security.
Hmm.
And this is a big one, right? Because if the climate changes, it could seriously affect our ability to produce food.
Absolutely. Food security is fundamental to, well, everything. If we can't feed people, nothing else really matters.
So what kind of solutions are we talking about here?
Well, one of the key things is developing crops that are more drought resistant.
Mm.
Think about grains like millets, sorghum, quinoa, amaranth. These crops have been cultivated for centuries in drier parts of the world, and they're incredibly resilient.
And they're also really nutritious.
Exactly. They're packed with nutrients and can be incredibly versatile in cooking.
So it's about diversifying our food sources.
Yeah, moving away from relying on just a few staple crops and embracing a wider range of plants that can thrive in different conditions.
Right. And it's not just about the crops themselves.
No, it's also about changing the way we farm.
Like shifting planting seasons to better align with changing rainfall patterns.
Right, adapting to the new climate realities.
And implementing precision irrigation techniques that deliver water exactly where and when it's needed to minimize waste.
Efficiency is going to be key.
And then finally, strengthening the entire food supply chain. So making sure we can get food to people, even if there are disruptions in certain regions.
Right, building redundancy into the system so we're not caught off guard.
Okay, so we've talked about climate resilience and food security, but what about energy?
Oh, yeah. Energy is going to be a big factor in all of this.
Right, because if it gets hotter, we're going to need more energy to cool our homes and businesses.
Absolutely. And that increased demand could put a strain on our existing energy systems, especially if they're still heavily reliant on fossil fuels.
Which of course contribute to climate change in the first place.
Right, so it's a vicious cycle.
So the sources I was looking at really stress the importance of expanding our use of renewable energy sources.
That makes a lot of sense. Solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower, these are all clean, sustainable energy sources that can help us reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
And it's not just about generating more renewable energy.
No, it's also about making sure our energy grids are up to the task.
Right, because a lot of renewable energy sources are intermittent, meaning they're not always available.
Exactly. So we need smart grids that can balance supply and demand, store energy for when it's needed, and efficiently distribute it where it needs to go.
Now, another important aspect that the sources brought up is the need to strengthen our public health systems. Because a warmer world could lead to some pretty serious health challenges.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're talking about more heat-related illnesses, increased risk of vector-borne diseases, and potentially even new health threats that we haven't even encountered yet.
So what kind of steps can we take to protect public health in this scenario?
Well, for starters, we need robust early warning systems for heat waves,
Okay.
so people can take precautions and stay safe during extreme heat.
And our healthcare facilities need to be prepared to handle an increase in heat stroke cases.
Right, making sure they have the resources and staff to handle the extra demand.
And we also need to educate the public about the risks of heat exposure and how to stay safe.
Absolutely. Simple things like staying hydrated, avoiding strenuous activity during the hottest parts of the day, and knowing the signs of heat stroke can make a big difference.
Now, of course, none of this preparation is going to be very effective if we're not constantly monitoring the situation.
Right. We need to keep a close eye on both the sun's activity and our own planet's climate.
Yeah, so the sources highlighted the crucial role of space agencies like NASA and the European Space Agency
Okay.
in tracking solar activity in real time.
Right. They're constantly monitoring the sun for things like solar flares and coronal mass ejections.
And they can issue warnings and alerts if they detect any activity that can pose a threat to Earth.
Exactly. It's like having a weather forecast for space weather.
And then on the climate side, we need to continue developing and refining climate models
Hmm.
so we can better understand how these subtle shifts in temperature could affect different parts of the world.
Right. Climate models are incredibly complex, but they're our best tool for predicting how the climate will change in the future.
And of course, all of this monitoring and modeling needs to be accompanied by international collaboration.
Absolutely. Climate change is a global problem, and it requires global solutions.
So sharing data, research findings, and coordinating our responses on an international level is going to be essential.
It's not about individual countries going it alone. It's about working together to find solutions that benefit everyone.
Now, the last area that I want to touch on before we wrap up is the role of policy and overall preparedness,
Okay.
because understanding the risks is only half the battle.
Right. We need to translate that knowledge into concrete actions.
So the sources talked about things like developing comprehensive disaster preparedness plans, enacting climate adaptation policies at all levels of government,
Right. Making sure our policies are aligned with the latest scientific understanding.
and launching public awareness campaigns to encourage more sustainable ways of living.
It's about changing our behaviors and making choices that are good for the planet.
Now, I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about a topic that you brought up that I found really fascinating.
Oh, okay. What's that?
It's about how a warmer climate could actually change the way we eat.
Hmm.
And I know this might sound a bit out there.
Yeah. It's not something people usually think about. But the food we eat is directly tied to the climate.
So you're saying that what we eat might have to change as the climate changes.
Well, it's not just about what we have to eat, but also what we choose to eat.
Okay.
Like if certain crops become harder to grow in a warmer world, we might need to shift our diets to focus on foods that are more resilient to drought and heat.
So it's about being adaptable, being
Yeah.
open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And there are actually a lot of really delicious and nutritious foods out there that are already well suited for a warmer climate.
Like what?
Well, remember those drought-resistant grains we talked about earlier?
Okay.
Millets, sorghum, quinoa, amaranth, those are all great examples.
Are packed with nutrients.
Exactly. They're full of fiber, protein, vitamins, and minerals. They can be a fantastic foundation for a healthy diet.
So it's not just about survival. It's about thriving.
Absolutely. And there are plenty of other options too.
Okay. Like what else?
Well, legumes are another great choice. Lentils, chickpeas, black-eyed peas, pigeon peas, they're all relatively drought-tolerant and heat-resistant, and they're a great source of protein and fiber.
And they're so versatile in cooking.
Exactly. You can make soups, stews, salads, dips, you name it.
Now, what about fruits and vegetables?
Well, some of the more delicate greens might struggle in a hotter climate, but there are plenty of heat-tolerant options out there, like okra, sweet potatoes, eggplant, tomatoes, pumpkins. Those can all handle the heat.
Yep, for fruits.
Well, things like dates, figs, pomegranates, guavas, even cactus fruits, those are all adapted to thrive in hot, dry conditions.
So it's not like we'd be stuck eating just grains and beans.
No, not at all. There's still plenty of variety and flavor to be found.
It's fascinating to think about how our diets might evolve in a warmer world.
It's a reminder that even in the face of challenges, there are opportunities for creativity and adaptation.
Now, one last thing that I want to touch on before we wrap up is the role of technology in all of this.
Okay.
Specifically, the potential of artificial intelligence, or AI.
Oh, yeah, AI. That's a game changer.
The sources I was looking at were really excited about the potential for AI to help us prepare for and adapt to climate change.
It makes sense. AI is all about analyzing massive amounts of data, identifying patterns, and making predictions. And that's exactly what we need to do if we're going to effectively respond to a changing climate.
So how can AI actually be applied to these challenges?
Well, in so many ways.
Okay.
Like, for starters, AI can help us improve our climate and weather predictions.
Mm.
By analyzing vast amounts of data from satellites, weather stations, and other sources, AI can help us create more accurate and detailed forecasts, which can be incredibly valuable for planning and decision-making.
And AI can also play a huge role in agriculture.
Oh yeah, for sure. AI-powered systems can monitor soil conditions, predict crop yields, and even control irrigation systems to optimize water use.
And it can even help us manage disasters.
Right. AI can help us identify areas that are most vulnerable to extreme weather events, and it can help us coordinate emergency response efforts.
And then there's the potential for AI to help us manage our energy systems.
Absolutely. AI can help us optimize energy grids, balance supply and demand, and integrate renewable energy sources more effectively.
And it can even help us protect public health.
Right. AI can help us track the spread of diseases, identify potential outbreaks, and even develop personalized health recommendations.
So basically, AI has the potential to be an incredibly powerful tool in helping us adapt to a changing world.
It's not a silver bullet, of course,
Yeah.
but it's definitely something we should be exploring and investing in.
Okay. So as we've explored in this deep dive, even a seemingly small increase in the sun's surface temperature, just 1 degree Celsius,
Right.
could actually trigger a whole cascade of effects here on Earth.
It's a reminder that everything is connected, and even small changes can have big consequences.
And while we certainly can't control the sun,
Yeah,
we can control how we respond to these changes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We have the knowledge, the tools, and the ingenuity to adapt and build a more resilient future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
If a 1 degree change in the sun's temperature can have such a profound impact on our planet, what other seemingly small changes might be happening right now?
Right.
That could have equally significant consequences down the line.
It's a question worth pondering.
It is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive,
It's been a pleasure.
and we'll see you next time.